Narcissists spend their lives believing they're untouchable. They think they can manipulate forever, that you'll always stay, and that your forgiveness will never run out. But psychologists explain that there comes a moment when their victim does the one thing they never expected: walk away for good. This act, simple yet powerful, plants a regret so deep that it follows the narcissist until their final breath. What makes this moment so powerful is the element of surprise. Narcissists expect anger, drama, even begging. What they never expect is silence. Psychologists describe this as a narcissistic injury, when their control collapses. The calmness of your exit speaks louder than any confrontation. That silence echoes in their mind, haunting them because they realize you've finally outgrown their games. The true regret begins when you stop reacting. For years, they thrived on your tears, your explanations, and your defense. But when you withdraw, they're left facing emptiness. Psychologists affirm that narcissists depend on emotional reactions to feel alive. When you take that away, it's like cutting off their oxygen. They regret pushing you so far that your emotions turned into indifference. One of the most devastating things you can do is to succeed without them. Narcissists convince themselves you can't survive without their guidance or presence. But psychologists say watching you thrive, finding peace, joy, and success on your own, is unbearable for them. Every smile, every achievement reminds them of what they lost. That regret burns deeply, because it proves they were never needed. Narcissists also never expect you to stop believing their lies. They rely on confusion and gaslighting to control you. But the moment you see through their illusions, everything changes. Psychologists explain that clarity is their worst enemy. Once you understand their patterns, the spell is broken. They regret underestimating your ability to wake up, because once awakened, you never return to sleep. Another thing they never thought you'd do is set boundaries. To a narcissist, boundaries feel like betrayal. They expect complete access to your time, energy, and emotions. But psychologists confirm that once you draw a line and enforce it, they lose control. This shift shocks them. They regret pushing you to the point where your kindness turned into firmness. The most painful regret comes when you choose peace over chaos. Narcissists thrive on conflict, keeping you trapped in cycles of highs and lows. But when you decide to break free, their chaos loses power. Psychologists note that this decision often comes quietly, but its impact is massive. They regret losing the ability to stir your emotions, because without your reactions, they feel irrelevant. They also never expect you to expose the truth. For years, they may have convinced others that they were the victim and you were the problem. But psychologists emphasize that once you find your voice and share your story, the mask slips. People start to see them clearly. Their greatest fear is exposure, and they regret underestimating your courage to finally speak out. One of the hardest regrets for narcissists is realizing they trained you to be strong. Every insult, every manipulation, every betrayal became a lesson. Psychologists explain that survivors often turn pain into power. The narcissist thought they were breaking you, but they were shaping resilience. In the end, they regret creating the very strength that allowed you to walk away. And here's the ultimate regret. They never thought you'd stop loving them. Narcissists survive on the belief that your love is endless, no matter how cruel they are. But psychologists say love has limits when it's constantly disrespected. When you finally withdraw that love, the narcissist feels the emptiness of their own heart. That loss becomes their lifelong regret, because they realize too late what they destroyed. Narcissists also never thought you'd learn to ignore their attempts to hoover you back in. They count on their victims responding to sweet messages, fake apologies, or sudden memories. But when you don't reply, it hits them harder than any argument. Psychologists explain that indifference is their greatest fear, that silence becomes their torment, and they regret underestimating your strength. They regret the moment you stopped trying to explain yourself. Narcissists thrive when you defend, clarify, and justify, because it gives them control. But psychologists say the most powerful shift happens when you stop explaining and start walking. Your refusal to waste energy on proving your truth shows them their tricks no longer work. That realization cuts deeper than any words. Another source of regret is when you begin to heal. Narcissists expect you to remain broken, replaying the pain they caused. But psychologists emphasize that healing robs them of their imagined victory. Watching you laugh again, trust again, and rebuild your life proves they failed. Their regret grows every time they see you shine brighter than before, despite their attempts to destroy you. They also regret the moment you choose self-love. For years, they trained you to put their needs above your own. But psychologists explain that once survivors choose themselves, the narcissist loses everything. They never expected you to redirect your love inward, to nurture your own growth. That shift makes them realize too late that their control was only borrowed, never permanent. Narcissists never expected you to tell your story without shame. They hoped you'd stay quiet, embarrassed, or doubting yourself. But psychologists say survivors often reach a point where they share, not for revenge but for freedom. When your story resonates with others, their mask crumbles. They regret every lie, because the truth spreads further than their performance ever could. They also regret when you stop comparing yourself to them. Narcissists want you to feel small, always chasing their approval. But psychologists highlight that true healing comes when you see your worth without their validation. When you stop competing and start living, you rise above their games. That independence leaves them regretting the hold they once thought was unbreakable. One of the most unexpected things you can do is forgive yourself. Narcissists want you stuck in self-blame, replaying what you should have done. But psychologists explain that self-forgiveness frees survivors from the cycle of shame. When you stop carrying guilt, you remove the chains they put on you. That freedom forces them to face their cruelty, and regret consumes them. They regret the moment you find new love, not because they care about your happiness, but because it proves they were replaceable. Psychologists say narcissists see partners as possessions. When you find someone who values you genuinely, it destroys their illusion of superiority. They regret losing the role they believed no one else could fill, realizing they were never as special as they thought. Another regret is watching you succeed where they failed. Narcissists often sabotage dreams, convincing you to shrink. But when you rise anyway, psychologists say it exposes their weakness. Every milestone you reach without them reflects their failure as a partner. That regret stings for life, because it reminds them they tried to stop you, and you thrived despite it. They also regret underestimating your silence. At first, they misread it as weakness. But psychologists emphasize that silence from an empowered survivor is power. When you stop reacting, arguing, or explaining, you leave them with nothing to feed on. That emptiness follows them, and regret grows every time they realize their power depended entirely on your energy. Narcissists never expected you to break the cycle. They count on repeating patterns: idealization, devaluation, discard, and hoover. But psychologists explain that once you recognize the cycle and refuse to enter again, the game ends. They regret pushing you to the point where you broke free, because now their favorite script has no actor to play the part. They regret every moment they underestimated your resilience. Narcissists believe their cruelty will shatter you permanently, but psychologists affirm that survivors often rebuild stronger than before. That strength leaves the narcissist shocked and ashamed. They regret that their abuse forged your armor, because now you are untouchable in ways they never imagined. Another regret is realizing they trained you to recognize manipulation. The very tricks they used on you become your warning signs. Psychologists highlight that survivors of narcissistic abuse often develop sharp intuition. You walk away from red flags faster than ever. They regret being your teacher in this cruel school of pain, because now you're immune to their games. They also regret the way you learned to love yourself more fiercely after leaving. Psychologists say survivors often discover worth they never knew they had. That love becomes a shield, protecting them from future harm. Narcissists never thought their cruelty would become the spark for your empowerment. That twist of fate leaves them with a regret they can't escape. The biggest shock comes when they realize they've lost their audience. For years, you listen to their stories, their lies, their exaggerations, but psychologists explain that once you leave, they're left with silence. Their words lose power without someone to absorb them. That emptiness fuels regret because their ego collapses without your attention to hold it up. They regret when you no longer need closure from them. Narcissists hold on to the belief that you'll keep chasing answers. But psychologists say the real healing happens when you create closure for yourself. When you stop waiting for an apology that will never come, they lose control. That independence forces them to see the truth. They were never as important as they believed. Narcissists never thought you'd learn to live joyfully without them. They expect survivors to remain haunted, bitter, or broken. But psychologists emphasize that true recovery is finding peace in small joys. Whether it's laughing freely, traveling, or rebuilding dreams, your joy torments them. They regret every cruelty because it became the fuel for your freedom. They also regret when you expose their patterns to others. Friends, family, or even new partners may see through them because of your truth. Psychologists explain that narcissists depend on their mask to survive. When your story spreads, the mask cracks. They regret every lie that now stands naked in the light of your courage. They regret the moment they realize they can't come back. For years, they believed you'd always leave a door open. But psychologists note that when an empath closes the door permanently, it's final. That locked door becomes a wound that never heals. They regret assuming you'd never find the strength to shut them out completely. The ultimate regret comes from knowing they destroyed real love. Psychologists highlight that narcissists crave love but sabotage it. When they finally understand what they lost, it's too late. They regret that they had someone who cared deeply, yet they pushed it away. That regret becomes their shadow, following them until their last breath. They regret losing the one person who saw their potential. Empaths often see the best in people, even when hidden. But once you stop, psychologists explain that the narcissist loses their biggest supporter. They realize too late that no one else will love them with the same depth. That loss becomes unbearable, leaving them haunted for life. Another regret comes when they realize manipulation doesn't work on you anymore. Narcissists recycle the same tactics, hoping you'll fall again. But psychologists note that survivors grow immune to old tricks. Every failed attempt stings, reminding them they lost control forever. They regret teaching you the very strategies that now protect you. They regret when you learn to enjoy solitude. Narcissists expect you to crumble alone, but psychologists affirm that many survivors find strength in solitude, discovering peace in their own company. That independence terrifies narcissists because it proves they were never your source of happiness. They regret underestimating your ability to build joy without them. They regret when they see you surrounded by genuine love. Friends, partners, or communities rally around you, offering real support. Psychologists highlight that this contrast burns them because they know their love was only manipulation. Your new circle exposes their emptiness, and they regret losing the chance to give what others now provide freely. Another regret is watching you inspire others. Survivors often use their story to help friends, communities, or even strangers. Psychologists say this transformation robs narcissists of the narrative. They wanted you silent, but instead, you turned pain into power. Every person you help deepens their regret because it proves their cruelty birthed strength, not destruction. They regret the way you stopped caring about their opinion. Narcissists thrive on controlling how you see yourself. But psychologists note that healing means their voice no longer defines you. When you stop needing their approval, they lose their grip. That freedom leaves them stewing in regret because they realize their words no longer matter. They regret every time they thought you'd never leave. Narcissists believe control is permanent, but psychologists confirm that when survivors finally go no contact, it's final. That departure is more powerful than any revenge. They regret the arrogance that blinded them because they never thought you'd have the courage to stay gone. They regret when you stop keeping their secrets. Narcissists rely on silence to protect their image, but psychologists say survivors eventually share the truth. Even whispers among family or friends dismantle the mask. They regret every cruel act, because once exposed, their reputation collapses. And for a narcissist, that collapse is worse than death. They regret when you start setting an example. Survivors who walk away inspire others in toxic relationships. Psychologists emphasize that this ripple effect weakens narcissists everywhere. They regret being the reason you found your power, because now your story breaks chains far beyond their control. Their legacy becomes destruction, while yours becomes freedom. They regret when they see you smiling again. Nothing enrages a narcissist more than realizing their cruelty didn't steal your joy. Psychologists say survivors often rediscover happiness in unexpected places. That smile becomes proof that their power is gone. Every laugh you share without them deepens their regret, reminding them they lost the one thing that was real. They regret when you stop explaining their behavior to others. Narcissists depend on excuses. They had a hard childhood, or they're just stressed. But psychologists note that once survivors stop covering, the truth spreads. Without excuses, their mask shatters. They regret every time they relied on your loyalty to protect their image, because that shield is gone forever. They regret the moment they realize they can't replace you. Narcissists rush into new relationships, flaunting their new supply. But psychologists explain that deep down, replacements never satisfy. Every new partner exposes the void you left. They regret burning the bridge with someone who offered genuine love, because no imitation fills the same space. They regret when you stop being afraid of them. Narcissists thrive on fear of abandonment, of criticism, of chaos. But psychologists confirm that once survivors find courage, the narcissist loses power. That fearlessness becomes the final blow. They regret every attempt to intimidate you, because in the end, all it did was make you stronger. They regret when you no longer play the victim. Narcissists want you trapped in pain, defined by what they did. But psychologists emphasize that survivors redefine themselves as victors. That shift enrages narcissists, because it proves they don't get the final word. They regret underestimating your ability to rise, because now you live as proof that their abuse failed. They regret when you find peace. Psychologists say peace is the one thing narcissists can never achieve. When they see you meditating, creating, laughing, or simply enjoying quiet moments, they feel envy. That envy turns into regret, because they realize they destroyed the chance to share real peace with you. Instead, they're left alone with chaos. They regret every time they thought you needed them. Psychologists confirm that narcissists build illusions of dependence, but when you show independence, paying bills, thriving emotionally, or enjoying life, they panic. That independence is a mirror of their failure. They regret taking advantage of you, because your freedom proves they never held real power. They regret when you learn to love again, not just romantically, but love for life itself. Psychologists explain that survivors often reconnect with hobbies, passions, and communities. That spark proves resilience. The narcissist, stuck in bitterness, feels regret because they realize your life continues beautifully without them. Their world shrinks while yours expands. They regret when you stop being their secret admirer. Narcissists rely on ex-partners still longing for them, but psychologists say healing cuts that tie. When you stop thinking of them as special, their illusion dies. That death of admiration becomes their deepest regret, because they realize their power never lasted. They regret when you stop fearing their judgment. Narcissists love being the critic, but psychologists affirm that confidence silences their voice. When you stand tall, proud of who you are, their insults bounce off. They regret ever trying to break your spirit, because now your strength exposes their weakness more than words ever could. And here's the final truth. The one thing narcissists never thought you'd do is live a life full of joy, freedom, and peace without them. Psychologists explain that this is their eternal regret, knowing they lost someone genuine, someone real, because of their own arrogance. And that regret doesn't fade. It follows them, haunting every smile you share without them until the day they die.